MGM, starring Yul Brynner.
Draw.
Draw. Just a command, spoken in a flat, emotionless tone, and at that exact moment, Westworld completely shatters the illusion that this was ever a vacation. I still remember clearly the image of the gunslinger standing motionless in the dust-choked street. His gun rising slowly, like a ritual programmed long ago. There is a chilling certainty in the air. The game is over, and the rules have just been torn apart. But the more I revisit Westworld, the more I realise the film was never really about machines. It is about a world where people pay to escape consequences.
The guns they give you are real guns?
Real good.
A place where violence is entertainment, sex is a service,
The vacation of the future, today. The robots look, act, talk, and even bleed just like humans do.
and memory can be erased so everything can start over again. A film made before Star Wars, yet one that accidentally raised questions sci-fi still hasn't dared to answer directly to this day. Below are 15 facts that quietly turned Westworld, 1973, into a lingering nightmare. 15. Disneyland. When a nightmare is born from the safest place, do you remember the feeling of seeing Westworld for the first time? A futuristic theme park, clean, glamorous, introduced with a gentle narration that sounds like a travel commercial. Everything feels familiar, almost comforting, like real-life amusement parks, safe, controlled, and designed so nothing bad can happen. That sense of familiarity is exactly what makes people miss the fact that Westworld began in a very real place, Disneyland.
Yes, yeah. The book actually began.
When Michael Crichton visited Disneyland, what struck him wasn't the castles or fireworks, but the robots in Pirates of the Caribbean. They moved smoothly, spoke naturally, repeated their actions without missing a beat. Too real to be just machines, too obedient to raise suspicion. And precisely because of that, Crichton felt uneasy. He asked himself, what if these robots didn't stop? Not if they became smarter, not if they rebelled out of self-awareness, but simply, what if they kept doing exactly what they were built to do, no longer for humans? Crichton understood this idea didn't belong in a novel. It needed images, space, and blank faces staring directly at the audience. Westworld was thus born as a visual experience where humans enter a park with absolute innocence, while violence is packaged as a premium service. In hindsight, this was the first sketch of Jurassic Park, a high-tech park for the elite, a collapsed control system, and the attractions turning on the guests. The only difference is that Jurassic Park had dinosaurs. Westworld had robots programmed to please humans, and that is far more terrifying. 14. Yul Brynner. When the symbol of emotionless death is born from desperation. I've never forgotten the image of that gunslinger stepping into the empty street. A rigid silhouette, a black hat cutting his face in half, steady footsteps echoing on dry ground. At the time, I couldn't name the feeling. It was just that every time he appeared, the film suddenly felt heavier. And when I learned that Yul Brynner took the role as his career was fading, the image became even more unsettling. When filming began, Brynner was at the lowest point of his career. No major projects, no attractive offers, and money was running out. His Westworld salary was far lower than during his golden years. Still, he accepted, not because he believed in the script, but because he had no other choice. From that situation, a cold figure was born. The gunslinger has no memorable dialogue, no motivation, no explanatory moment. He just walks, stops, raises his gun, and continues. The costume Brynner wears almost perfectly matches his role as Chris in The Magnificent Seven. Many viewers saw this as a nostalgic wink, but there's a harsher reading. Westworld was recycling Hollywood's old violent legends into an emotionless killing machine. The irony is that a role accepted out of financial desperation became the template for modern evil. John Carpenter drew inspiration from the gunslinger to create Michael Myers. Arnold Schwarzenegger adopted the same presence for the Terminator. A robot without expression, born of reluctance, taught cinema that the most terrifying death is the one that needs no reason. 13. Chaotic casting, when the protagonists are chosen because no one wanted them. If the gunslinger is the nightmare, then John and Peter are the only anchors the audience has. And ironically, these crucial roles almost failed to exist in any meaningful way. The original shortlist was packed with big names: James Caan, Jon Voight, Elliot Gould. But one by one they dropped out. Schedule conflicts, salary demands, or simply a lack of faith in a strange sci-fi western no one knew would succeed. There was a moment when everything seemed settled with William Shatner, Captain Kirk, cast as Peter Martin. Then the studio made a blunt calculation. If Yul Brynner was to remain the biggest star, the other two leads couldn't overshadow him. Shatner was dropped. Everything reset. Time was running out. In the end, the filmmakers chose younger faces, with less shine, almost anonymous. A decision born of necessity, but accidentally perfect. John and Peter aren't heroes. They're not exceptionally smart. They have no grand plan. They're just ordinary people who enter a world promised to be safe, only to realize that promise comes with no exit clause. And because they aren't special, the hunt that follows becomes truly terrifying. Westworld doesn't kill exceptional people. It crushes those who thought they were just on vacation. 12. Westworld reflects the era's disturbingly dirty sexual obsession. There's something strange about rewatching Westworld today. The feeling isn't shock, it's familiarity. An uncomfortable kind of familiarity. Scenes of robots designed to serve the sexual desires of guests once unsettled 1970s audiences. Now they resemble a rough, unpolished prototype of what the internet has long normalized. And it's precisely that roughness that makes them linger. Westworld never hides the fact that robots are used for sex. No metaphors, no evasions, no romantic gloss. Consent is unnecessary because the robots are programmed to say yes from the start. For the guests, it isn't a crime, it's a service, fully prepaid. What matters is how Crichton films these scenes. He doesn't shoot them like the softcore exploitation films common at the time. His camera is cold, distant, almost indifferent. Robotic bodies are framed like objects. Movements are mechanical. Lighting is flat. There is no invitation to pleasure. If any emotion remains, it is emptiness. And there, Westworld says what society then refused to hear. When desire is granted absolute power, it doesn't become freer or more liberating. It becomes warped. Not because desire itself is evil, but because it no longer faces another subject. No boundaries, no consequences, no refusal. Westworld doesn't condemn tourists through dialogue or moral lessons. It simply shows an uncomfortable truth. Sex born of absolute power always carries the shape of violence, no matter how civilized the name attached to it. And when the robots begin to resist, the greatest fear isn't that they kill humans. It's that they refuse to keep playing the role of toys. 11. Richard Benjamin and the shooting lesson that forbade blinking. Most viewers remember Peter's eyes as he pulls the trigger. There's no heroism, no resolve, just a wide, rigid stare, as if the body is trying to keep up with an action the mind hasn't fully accepted. That feeling isn't accidental, and it isn't purely acting. To prepare for the role, Richard Benjamin trained with a specially modified revolver, not to shoot better, but to eliminate anticipation. The chambers were loaded unevenly, unpredictably, so every pull of the trigger carried a different possibility. No rhythm, no safe reflex, only real tension. The result? Benjamin doesn't blink when he fires. Not out of bravery, but because his brain can't issue the command in time. His body learns to accept the loss of control, and the camera captures it clearly. A man unfamiliar with violence, forced to participate in it to survive. It's a small detail, but it perfectly matches Westworld's spirit. Peter doesn't become a gunslinger. He doesn't level up. He simply learns to endure the next moment. Survival in the film doesn't come from skill, but from the ability not to collapse from fear too soon. Westworld doesn't teach audiences how to fight. It shows what happens when an ordinary person is thrown into a situation where all familiar instincts are useless. And sometimes, survival is simply not blinking. 10. Real accidents on set, when safety collapses in real life. Do you remember that shot? The moment when James Brolin's character hesitates, just a fraction slower than the film's rhythm. A flicker of panic in his eyes, a sharp breath, a face briefly distorted. Too brief to be a climax, yet too real to be acting. If you've seen Westworld more than once, you may have sensed something off in that scene without knowing why. The reason is simple. At that moment, things had gone beyond the script. During filming, James Brolin was bitten by a real snake. Not a prop, not a cinematic trick. A real snake, real fangs, piercing through the protective padding the crew believed was sufficient. The pain registers instantly on his face, and the camera keeps rolling. That moment stayed in the film not because it was beautiful, but because it couldn't be faked. Yul Brynner wasn't spared either. In another scene, he was struck in the eye by a blank round. The injury was serious enough that he could no longer wear the robot contact lenses as originally designed. The shooting schedule had to be rearranged, and scenes were staged so the gunslinger avoided looking directly into the camera. By accident, this made the character even colder and more hollow. A killing machine that didn't need eye contact to intimidate. The irony is that these real-life accidents made Westworld more honest to its own message. The film depicts a park marketed as perfectly safe, where every risk has been calculated. But when the control system collapses, pain appears immediately, raw and without warning. And the Westworld set reenacted that very scenario. Not out of malice, simply because humans trusted their safeguards too much. When they failed, what remained wasn't a moral lesson, but a survival reflex, plainly visible on the actors' faces. 9. Cinematography and technical breakthroughs, when the future is built from leftovers. I still remember Westworld's distinctive sense of artificiality. The strangely pristine western streets, the saloons that feel oddly familiar, and a future that doesn't look futuristic at all. That feeling isn't imagined. It's the result of a very practical decision. Westworld was shot on MGM's backlot just before the set was demolished. Most of the costumes and props were leftovers from decades of old westerns. Crichton didn't try to hide this. He leaned into it. As a result, the park looks like a recycled past, scrubbed clean and resold to wealthy tourists. The film was shot quickly, in just 30 days. No reshoots unless absolutely necessary. Crichton wanted everything to operate like Delos itself, efficient, economical, emotionless. Yet within that frugality, Westworld delivered a memorable technical leap. It was the first feature film to use digital image processing to represent the gunslinger's point of view. The blocky, noisy, distorted images, primitive by today's standards, were shocking at the time. Not because they were beautiful, but because they were inhuman. For the first time, audiences didn't just look at a robot, they saw the world through a machine's eyes. Another interesting detail, the Delos promotional film that opens Westworld was added at the very last minute in post-production.
Well, there are some of the comments of the people who just returned from Delos. Why don't you make arrangements to take our hovercraft to medieval world, Roman world, and Westworld?
It doesn't just explain the setting, it lulls the audience into a false sense of safety before everything collapses. And then there's a detail that now feels both amusing and chilling. Westworld's future is the year 1983. the year Return of the Jedi was released, and also the year the park's robots begin killing guests. The future, it turns out, always arrives sooner than expected and is often built from old parts. 8. Deleted scenes when Westworld was once far more brutal. If you've ever felt that Westworld has an odd rhythm, fast, abrupt, sometimes as if it's missing a breath, you're not wrong. The film you know isn't the original version, it's a trimmed one. Crichton initially shot Westworld with a completely different opening and ending. It was longer, more violent, and more direct, but during editing he realised something. If there was too much, the audience wouldn't have time to feel fear. They would simply watch. A number of scenes were cut. A long, chaotic bank robbery, extended chases that ended in exhaustion, a robot tearing a guest's arm apart, even Roman soldiers tossing people into a pool for sport. These scenes weren't removed because they were too graphic, but because they were too heavy. They turned Westworld into a straightforward horror film, while Crichton wanted something colder, frightening in a slow, inescapable way. Some of this footage survived in 1970s TV versions, where censorship was oddly more permissive. But the theatrical cut we know today is the result of restraint. Westworld chooses not to show you everything. It lets imagination do the rest. And sometimes, what's been cut is exactly what makes the film more haunting. Because you know it once existed, just not long enough to stay. 7. The gunslinger, the image of non-negotiable violence. There are villains you can talk to, villains you can persuade, bribe, or distract. The gunslinger is not one of them. From the start, Michael Crichton deliberately stripped this character of everything that might make him human. The gunslinger doesn't preach. He doesn't declare a goal. He has no grand plan. He doesn't need to save the future, doesn't need logic, doesn't need justification. He simply continues. This is what sets him apart from the later Terminator. The Terminator has a mission, a timeline, a cause. The gunslinger does not. He is a process, a loop of violence that doesn't care who you are. Because of that, many critics have read the gunslinger as a symbol of systemic violence, a machine of power with no hatred, no emotion, no room for negotiation, grinding down anything weaker than itself. You can't beg, you can't explain, you can't compromise. Westworld, therefore, doesn't tell a story of humans versus machines. It tells a story of humans confronting a form of violence that doesn't need a reason to exist. And that is why the gunslinger is far more terrifying than villains who can speak. 6. The gunslinger and the shadow of the Magnificent Seven. And if the gunslinger looks familiar, it's no accident. His costume is almost an exact match to Chris, the character Yul Brynner played in The Magnificent Seven, 1960. Same black outfit, same hat, same stance. Once Chris was a hero, a symbol of masculinity and moral clarity, a representative of order in the Old West. 13 years later, the same image, the same man, now a killing machine. This is both homage and a cruel parody. Westworld takes Hollywood's classic myth of violence and strips it of its soul. No ideals, no righteousness, only the silhouette and the gun. Audiences at the time didn't just see a robot, they saw the corruption of cinematic memory itself. An old hero returning not to save anyone, but to hunt. Westworld thus asks a vicious question. What happens when figures once celebrated are turned into tools, endlessly repeating violent behaviour without any moral framework attached? The gunslinger doesn't just kill characters in the film. He kills the illusion that violence was ever noble, and that may be Westworld's deadliest shot. Bites, Michael Crichton and the sci-fi film he never wanted to make. Most audiences don't realise that Westworld is proof of a film born not from passion, but from constraint. When the project began, Michael Crichton was not a box office guarantee, let alone the sci-fi king history would later crown him. He was a physician who wrote novels and had just directed a little-seen television film. Crichton teamed up with producer Paul Lazarus III, and the two quickly aligned. They wanted to make something bigger, riskier, but one detail is often overlooked. Crichton didn't want his feature film debut to be science fiction. To him, sci-fi was easily misunderstood, often dismissed as cheap entertainment and notoriously difficult to keep intellectually serious. Worse still, the Westworld script was rejected again and again. Studio after studio passed. Too strange, too risky, too hard to sell. Eventually, only MGM agreed, and that was the studio infamous for heavy-handed creative interference. Crichton hesitated. He'd heard enough horror stories about directors losing control. The rare stroke of luck was MGM's executive producer, promising Crichton full creative freedom. And perhaps that very lack of expectation saved Westworld. Crichton didn't try to make grand, spectacular sci-fi. He made something cold, dry, stripped of futuristic glamour, closer to a surgical procedure than a technological dream. As a result, Westworld doesn't fetishize machines. It distrusts them. It doesn't worship the future. It is wary of promises. And the paradox is this. A sci-fi film made by someone who didn't want to make sci-fi became one of the genre's most clear-eyed works. 4. The gunslinger only hunts Peter, and that's no accident. Did you notice it? When everything collapses, the gunslinger doesn't hunt both men. He ignores John, the aggressive one, the proactive one, the one ready for violence. Instead, he focuses solely on Peter, a choice so cold it's unsettling. Peter hesitates. Peter is afraid. Peter runs before he thinks. In the language of the system, he is perfect prey. Not a threat, not an opponent, just what remains. Many viewers read this as a dramatic choice. But looked at more closely, it follows machine logic. A system doesn't need to eliminate the strongest first. It crushes the weakest, because that's the most efficient way to maintain power. The gunslinger doesn't hate Peter. He doesn't even recognize him in an emotional sense. Peter is simply the easiest data point to process. And that's what makes the pursuit terrifying. There's nothing personal about it. Westworld, therefore, isn't telling a story about a duel. It's telling a story about being selected by a system as a target. Not because you did something wrong, but because you're easier to crush than someone else. 3. A sci-fi film that offers no sense of victory. The ending of Westworld is nothing but a quiet exhaustion. Peter survives, but no one would call it a victory. There is no salvation, no system reset, no moral lesson delivered in a warm, reassuring voice. Peter isn't smarter, he isn't stronger. He doesn't grow in the Hollywood sense. He simply gets out, and that's all. Westworld breaks one of the deepest conventions of American cinema. Survival does not equal victory. Survival only means it wasn't your turn yet. The system is still there. The mechanisms are still running, and there's no guarantee it won't happen again. It's an uncomforting ending, but it's an honest one. Westworld doesn't want you to leave feeling relieved. It wants you to carry an unanswered question, and the sense that you've just narrowly stepped out of something far larger than yourself. 2. When the sequel tries to explain everything, and fails, there's an unwritten rule in cinema. When a film leaves too many gaps, the sequel will try to fill them. Futureworld 1976 is a textbook example, and a warning. The sequel pivots toward conspiracy, cloning world leaders, and global political manipulation. Bigger in scale, more ambitious, and cold in a way that feels hollow. Michael Crichton refused to take part. Yul Brynner appears only briefly. The result is a confused film, alien to the original's spirit and a major failure. The 1980 television series fared no better. The world expanded, but the obsession vanished. So much so that when HBO's 2016 remake became a hit, the original creator openly admitted he'd never watched it. Perhaps because he understood this. Westworld doesn't need further explanation. It survives on ambiguity, and every attempt to clarify it only kills the story a little more. Release and legacy, a question still unanswered. Westworld premiered in August 1973. Budget, $1.2 million. Box office, over $10 million. MGM's most successful film of that year. It was accompanied by a novelization, more faithful to Crichton's original vision. Today, Westworld is considered a sci-fi classic. But beneath the entertainment, it has always been about very old things: slavery, exploitation, power, class. Robots are forced to serve every desire, from violence to flesh, for the wealthy within a system labelled entertainment. And the film never gives a clear answer. Did the robots rebel, or did the system awaken on its own? Is there consciousness, or merely logic operating as designed? Perhaps that ambiguity is why Westworld still endures. Not as a prophecy about technology, but as a mirror. One in which humans see themselves in the way they build and abuse systems they believe to be inanimate. Looking back at Westworld, 1973, the most frightening thing isn't robots killing people, nor technology slipping out of control. It's the feeling of familiarity. Everything in the film is designed to reassure humans, safe, controlled, scripted, clearly bounded. And then, layer by layer, those protections collapse. Not because of rebellion, but because the system functions exactly as it was designed to. What about you? Which detail left the strongest impression on you in Westworld? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more upcoming videos.